Think we're live here, brother.
Yalla, alhamdulillah. All right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam. Wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammadin khairil awwaleen wa ala akhirin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Great to be here with everyone today. I'm Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid, the founding director of the Lamppost Education Initiative and associate professor of Islamic law and prophetic tradition at Zaytuna College. And alhamdulillah, today we at Lamppost, we are putting on this special program related to what is known the Respect for Marriage Act. And we have with us our brother, our teacher, Brother Ismail, who is not only a board member of the Lamppost Education Initiative, but also he serves as the director of the Islam and Religious Freedom Action Team for the Religious Freedom Institute, which is a conservative think tank, which is located in the DC area. Ismail, of course, has a lot of experience in a lot of different areas. He's worked for multiple Muslim organizations in the past. He, of course, is also fluent in Arabic and also in other areas of study. And in particular today, we want to talk about this very special legislation, which is soon to be passed. It's already passed the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, and I believe that it's waiting for ratification with the president. We want to discuss the ramifications or potential ramifications that the Respect for Marriage Act shall have on Muslims, inshallah, and Muslim institutions. And because Brother Ismail, he operates in this realm related to legislation, matters related to Supreme Court issues as well, we wanted to bring him on as our expert related in this particular area. And so welcome, of course, Brother Ismail. And I wanted to begin by asking you to just explain to us what exactly is this legislation, what is Respect for Marriage Act, what is it, what is this particular legislation, and what does it entail?
Yes, well, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me on. And I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties.
But, that's a good technical difficulty. It's okay, mashallah.
Anyway, I'm trying to keep their faces out of the of the thing. Okay, guys, you guys have to run along, play with grandfather because I'm doing something. Okay.
This time we're gonna make an egg and cheese sandwich.
Oh, mashallah. Okay. All right. Well, you guys run along because I'm on a work phone call. See you soon. Okay. Love you. Hey, Sam, could you play with these kids? Because I'm on a phone call right now.
Your brother's well. Difficulty, inshallah.
All right. Well, I'm very sorry, but
yeah, it's okay. Alhamdulillah. So we wanted to ask the first question is that what is the significance? What is, of course, the Respect for Marriage Act? What is, you can tell us something about its history? What's its significance in general, inshallah?
All right. Well, Respect for Marriage Act. So, subhanAllah, I mean, we did have a little interruption here, but actually, quite appropriately, what we're talking about today here is really families, the miracle of life, the miracle of the rights of children. All these things are actually quite relevant here, and so these, the beauty of children is a good reminder of what we're really here talking about, So let's talk a little bit about this act and what it's about and what its background is, and before we get into what it might mean for Muslims, both practically and for our, the extent to which our understanding of reality is slowly being, shall we say, the contemporary culture is beginning to move away from what that worldview is.
Mm-hmm.
So let's first talk about this Respect for Marriage Act. So The Congress passed, and I can't give you the exact date of when that was, but it was in the 2010s, a law that was a law called the Defense of Marriage Act. The Defense of Marriage Act was aimed at defining marriage as between a man and a woman with a federal law.
Yeah, I think that was 1996. Actually, I think it was a lot earlier. You know, it was under President Clinton. Right?
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. So the Respect for Marriage Act was declared to be unconstitutional in a couple different court rulings, but the most crucial of which really is Obergefell. So Obergefell was issued, and this case, Supreme Court case, declared that it violated the 14th Amendment's protection of supposed protection of something called substantive due process, which we'll discuss what that means, in not allowing people of the same sex to get married in the way that people of opposite sex could get married. Mm-hmm. So what we have happen is this Obergefell case. Now, Obergefell, the court in that case said, well, we want to make clear that those who believe that marriage is only between a man and a woman are doing so. They have those beliefs based on honorable reasons. In other words, the court is trying to soften the blow and of this momentous decision, mm-hmm. and to prevent a situation where those who, or at least a court's facilitation of a situation where those who believe that marriage is only between a man and a woman don't get treated as racists, like similar to racists or something, with previous court opinions that basically codified into or basically affirmed in law the culture's overall understanding that it was absolutely dishonorable to have a law or even to personally oppose marriage between people of different races.
Right. So we're talking about Obergefell. That's the case that legalized same-sex marriage. That's what you're talking about, right?
Right. So Obergefell was that case. And so the court in Obergefell had a line in there which specifically said, we do not, or we affirm that those who believe that marriage is only between a man and a woman do so for honorable traditional reasons and so on and so on. In other words, again, the attempt there was to try to not make it so that, okay, just because there's a court decision here, that somehow those who oppose the idea that marriage could exist between two people of the same sex, it's to say that, well, you people those who believe that, they do so they're not like racists. Yeah. It's not the same thing as opposing marriage between people of different races. Yeah. In other words, that there's a traditional religious reason for that, and those who hold on to this are not bad people; they're not dishonorable people. So that's what the court said. But of course, whether or not that's going to hold true in the culture is not at all clear, because already, of course, it's there are large segments of the population who believe and to advocate that to oppose same-sex marriage is really the same thing as to
oppose interracial marriage.
As to be a racist, yeah, to oppose interracial marriage. Yeah. So now we come to let's fast forward a little bit to Dobbs. Now, why are we talking about Dobbs? Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization was a ruling earlier this year in which the Supreme Court invalidated Roe v. Wade. It overruled Roe v. Wade, which is, of course, the case which held there was a constitutional right to have an abortion protected by, among other things, substantive due process, this phrase, which we're going to come back to. Mm-hmm. So first of all, at this at this point, we have to talk about explain why Dobbs is relevant here to this bill. The idea of substantive due process relates to a constitutional theory that there are rights that Americans have, and that in fact human beings have, that are not enumerated in the Constitution, that are not mentioned in, like, say, for example, in the Bill of Rights, which lists, which is a list of several, many different rights which Americans enjoy, and in many cases, presumably human beings enjoy. So one of these amendments is the 14th Amendment, which was a Reconstruction Amendment. It was passed in order to undo the effects of slavery. It was passed after slavery was abolished, and the purpose there is to establish that any state, and prior to this, as states, the federal Constitution was not seen to apply to states, and then after the 14th Amendment, more or less was seen as being the vehicle through which the rights in the federal Constitution were incorporated by the state into states. So the states are no longer allowed to violate, say, the First Amendment, whereas in the past that wasn't the case. And so that's one of the things that the 14th Amendment did. So what the 14th Amendment does, though, it prohibits state governments from violating the right or from not providing what's called due process in taking away the life or liberty or property of citizens. So due process means process that is due. In other words, you can have your life taken away by the government. Yeah. Just one moment. I'm sorry. Just give me a second.
We'll wait for Brother Ismail to come. Inshallah. It's like a different type of technical difficulty. So, inshallah. So please bear with us, and inshallah, we'll be right back now.
Having a breakdown in our childcare situation here.
Inshallah. Go ahead, just try to ignore it. You just we
okay.
understand you in this stress.
I think it's being, I'm sorry. I think it's being handled.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the government can take away your right, can take away your life, can take away your property, can take away your liberty, but you have to have some level of process, meaning justice, fairness. There has to be a trial. There has to be, something like that to happen for it to be taken away. Now, the issue here is process. There's a process. It's not this amendment clearly is not establishing any substantive rights. It's just talking about the process by which those things are taken away. So there has arisen in constitutional theory this idea that of substantive due process, which sounds like a contradiction, and many people have argued, including Justice Clarence Thomas, who we're going to get to, is a very critical figure in this, how this bill even became law. Many people have argued that the idea of substantive due process is actually an oxymoron, because you have process and you have substance. So process is the way by which the substantive right is taken away. Whatever. I mean, you have to have that. You have to have a due process that is due to you. But substantive due process implies that the amendment actually creates some rights that are not exactly specified, right, but which exist somehow to be discovered. Either that they exist now in the abstract to be discovered, or that they will continue, new rights will continue to emerge as human beings change, and so on and so on.
Right. So basically, and that's the way they get to, like, okay, we have a right to abortion. We have a right to same-sex marriage. Right. Okay.
Exactly. So now, it's very critical to understand here that Thomas, in Dobbs said, look, first of all, the main court opinion said, first of all, there's no mention of abortion in the Constitution or in the Bill of Rights. So we know that if there is to be discovered a right to abortion, we have to locate it. We have to figure out what that right is. And the court said, in the past, we have only found unenumerated rights, that is, rights that are not specifically mentioned in the Constitution. We have only found them if they are part of the tradition, part of America's tradition. In other words, if they were rights that were enjoyed by and recognized by Anglo-American law, English law, American law, prior to the Constitution's founding, or prior to America's founding, or during the early years of the Republic. So he said, so Dobbs said, the author of Alito, in writing the opinion, said, well, to the contrary, actually, you find that abortion was actually prohibited, or at least restricted in many ways. So there is no, just going by our the Supreme Court's methodology of discovering rights that are not specifically listed. This one doesn't. Roe was wrongly decided because this was never a right in the first place. So, what Thomas does. So in other words, Dobbs does not reject outright the notion of rights that are not specifically listed in the Constitution that need to be might need to be discovered somehow. And by the way, this position is actually the fact that there are rights that are not specifically listed in the Constitution is actually one shared even by those who adhere to classical law, natural law, and so on, would agree with that. It's just that the problem is how do you limit that? You know what I mean? Like, so the Washington Post recently ran a very interesting series of articles by a law professor who's saying, oh no, there are unenumerated rights. It's just that they change as because that their belief, their understanding of the nature of the human person is that the human being is always changing, always progressing, and there's always new grounds of liberty, and ultimate freedom. The aim here being is ultimate human liberation. You know what I mean? Yeah. So the Constitution needs to be continuously unfolded in ways that were never imagined by these racist white guys who wrote it, and the ultimate aim is complete human liberation. And they're afraid of Dobbs because Dobbs recognized this, that there are unenumerated rights, but those unenumerated rights are limited to those that were at least could plausibly be understood to have been recognized in the tradition. So Thomas comes along and says, in his concurrence, he's agreeing with Dobbs, but he says, I agree with Dobbs's result, but I disagree with how it got there. There is no, we should declare that there is that substantive due process is a farce and a fraud, and is a philosophical, just nonsense, and that there is no such thing. Now, Thomas is not saying that there is not some other way to acknowledge the existence of rights that are not specifically listed in the Constitution. He's just saying you don't get there through the concept of substantive due process. There are other ways, like, for example, the 14th Amendment itself lists has a phrase in it that could support that, other than the due process phrase, but it's got another rights or privileges, or sorry, I forgot the exact phrase, but anyway, or the 9th Amendment, which does something similar, seems to point to the. And of course, we know that when the Bill of Rights was first passed, that there was actually a very large segment of the founders were very opposed to it, because they said, if we pass this, that's going to suggest that we're limiting and we're saying that there are no other rights other than this. So anyway, a very critical example is the right of parents to raise their children, or to educate their children, which was recognized in a case called Pierce versus Society of Sisters. So that's not mentioned in the Constitution anywhere, but and yet it was recognized by the Supreme Court and has, it's really never been denied that there is a right, a human right, not a human right in the ideological sense, but there's a right as a human being to raise your children without government interference in what they're going to be taught, and so on and so on. And so this is Thomas's monkey wrench here that he throws into the whole works is saying we need to re-examine our entire substantive due process jurisprudence, including Obergefell.
Right.
So he mentions specifically we need to look at Obergefell and say maybe we need to overrule this, just in the same way that we just overruled.
And that's what set everybody off. And it's like, okay, he wants to overturn same-sex marriage, right?
Exactly. That's what set everyone off. Okay. Now, so Congress goes and says, actually, it was a very smart move by Democratic leaders in Congress was to say, aha, this is our opportunity to push through a federal law which recognizes same-sex marriage, and we'll do so, in the panic that was created, in which we will actually fan the flames of, in order to create a sense of urgency to pass a law that codifies as federal law that a same-sex marriage. So
now, why is that significant? I mean, I know why personally, but I think that for a lot of people who may eventually see this recording,
right,
understand why is it significant that you pass a federal law, right, as opposed to, I guess you'd say, legislating from the bench, right? As that the political parties have been doing for a very long time.
Well, with the significance is because, so I mean, what we're gonna talk about throughout, I think, this webinar, inshallah, is the significance of this for Muslims and other people who believe in God and believe in traditional understandings of the human being is, number one, what is the practical legal significance, and number two, what is the metaphysical significance, and then relatedly to that, what is the significance of becoming a person, being rendered a person who has who is now basically considered to be a rebel against the philosophy underlying federal law. It's not hard to imagine that pretty soon, the day will come when you're no longer going to be tolerated. You're no longer to be considered someone who disagrees for an honorable reason. So the reason that this is significant is because Obergefell already makes it unconstitutional, allegedly. Anyway, makes it illegal for states not to recognize same-sex marriage. So what is the purpose of a law that puts that into federal legislation? So there's a difference here between, here's the court saying no law is constitutional that prohibits same-sex marriage. Supreme Court said that. So no state legislation can actually pass such a law. And those state legislatures that have those laws on the books, they may still be on the books, but they can't be enforced.
Right.
So
and that's different from Dobbs, right? Because with Dobbs, it was more so a question of, okay, send it back to the states. And if your state wants to authorize abortion, then go right ahead. And if it doesn't, but
right.
This situation is all of the states have to acknowledge this as being a legal marriage, and all of the consequences of that have to be respected.
Yeah, Obergefell does the same thing that Roe v. Wade did. Obergefell said, Roe v. Wade said, hey, whatever your laws on abortion are, states, if they in any way interfere with or regulate abortion in the first trimester, then it's unconstitutional. It's not allowed. So all those laws that were on the books in the states that did regulate abortion prior to the first trimester are now suddenly unconstitutional. They might still be on the books, but they can't be enforced. Well, likewise, after Obergefell, suddenly, and then when Dobbs comes back, many of those laws that were actually still on the books now come back into force. So with Obergefell, the fear of the left is that once that if Obergefell is in fact overturned, as Thomas is asking for and calling for, then what will happen is that the state laws that prohibited same-sex marriage will come back into effect, or even that other states that might have passed laws allowing, same-sex marriage, they might change for, the political leadership might change, and then they'll pass laws that prohibit same-sex marriage.
Right.
So the idea of this Respect for Marriage Act came about to say, all right, regardless of whether Obergefell is ever overturned, it is now a federal law that if it's very clever the way that they did it. If one state recognizes a marriage, any sort of marriage at all, then that marriage has to be recognized by all other states. So in other words, so if Vermont allows same-sex marriage, so let's say Obergefell is overturned, Vermont allows same-sex marriages. This same-sex couple who got quote unquote married in Vermont goes to Texas, where let's say in this hypothetical scenario, they don't recognize same-sex marriage as marriage, and they go there and they try to get benefits or something like that are available under the state, and the state says, no, we don't recognize your union as a marriage, and so therefore you don't get. This is what this law is aimed at prohibiting. Right. So that if state officials do that, they can be subject to suit by the Attorney General of the United States or by the individuals themselves.
Right.
So more or less what this does. Now, here's another interesting aspect of this. So the law, essentially that's the mechanism of the law. If a marriage is recognized by state A, then it must be recognized by states B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Okay. With the exception of polygamy. So we're not going to recognize polygamy. We'll talk about that in a second because that's actually an interesting point.
I had a question about it. Shall we come back to that?
Obviously it's aimed directly at Muslims, and it's also aimed at Mormons. Most Mormons don't practice polygamy anymore, but some sects of it do. So that's aimed directly at Muslims to try to block that. Now, of course, it was put in under pressure from conservatives, actually conservative Christians who don't. Liberals probably would have allowed it because they don't really recognize any kind of definition of marriage at all anymore, at least any kind of inherent definition, which is something important to note. So that's how we get here. That's how the law. Now, if you have any questions, go ahead, and then we can get into what are the actual some of the ramifications of the law.
No, I think that just explaining I think it would probably be good just for us to go through some of the main points of the Respect for Marriage Act, right? Of course, you talked about, for instance, the Defense of Marriage Act, which actually created an actual definition of marriage, right? Which apparently wasn't available at the time. For some reason they had felt the need, but this is between one man and one woman. But then all of a sudden that was overturned by the Respect for Marriage Act, where they're talking about individuals, right? Between two individuals, right? And they can be a man to man, woman to woman, but also part of that has a clause absolutely outlawing polygamy, right? Which is really interesting, right? When you look at it, I was reading the act earlier today. The significance, I guess you'd say, because one of the questions I think when we advertised this particular webinar that we wanted to be answered was what are the ramifications, right, of this particular act on Muslims, right? Of course, you had alluded earlier to the more metaphysical, spiritual sort of ramifications, right? And I think that I actually want to spend a little bit of time on that later on.
Absolutely.
But if there are any legal concerns, right, that we have, right, from the actual act itself.
Yes. Okay. So the reason that the way that this bill, and it's actually quite short, it only has a few sections. I just sent you a link to it somehow or another. We'll see if we can put the link up in the description. So it's a link to the text of the bill. It's relatively short. And we'll just run through it and explain what some of these provisions do and then what the implications are for Muslims. And again, we'll focus first on the actual practical ramifications. One of the reasons that this bill was able to get actually quite bipartisan support, many Republicans supported it, is because the bill just goes absolutely, bends over backwards to clarify that no nonprofit faith-based organization is going to suffer any ramifications from a failure to, or from their refusal to solemnize a same-sex marriage. So in other words, someone goes to a mosque and they say, I want you to solemnize, because we have in most states, there's a process by which a faith leader, whether Muslim, Christian, Jewish, whatever, can have the power to solemnize marriages through the state. So this is kind of involving the religious institutions in recognizing solemnizing solemnizing marriages. Okay, so you can go to an imam, or you can go to a priest or something like that, have the marriage solemnized in front of them, and then you take that to the city hall, and they'll stamp it or whatever as now you're married. So there's a religious component that if someone chooses, they can do that. Now, what this law does, as I mentioned, is it makes it illegal to not to recognize same-sex marriage. Well, what it does, though, is that it it provides an out for religious institutions. So this law, with the passage of this law, there is absolutely no chance under the terms of the law itself that a masjid could get in trouble for not recognizing, for not solemnizing the marriage, so-called marriage. The problem, right? The problem is that this this exception only applies to solemnizing the marriages. It doesn't have anything. It doesn't in any way protect from, let's say, someone comes and says, "Hi, we're a same-sex couple, and we want to volunteer at your mosque to do X, Y, Z, and or we want to work at your mosque," and they say, well, no, we're not going to, allow you to do that. Well, you're already protected by the First Amendment if it's a masjid, but not necessarily if it's, say, like a food pantry or something like that, and so this law actually does not in any way offer any protection. Actually, what this law really does is that it actually creates a new legal cause of action, meaning a new grounds to sue a religious institution, including an Islamic institution, if that institution is "quote unquote" acting under the color of law. What does that mean? So the law, the new bill says no person acting under color of state law may deny a right or claim arising from such a marriage on the basis that such a marriage would not be recognized under the law of that state on the basis of sex, etc. What does that mean? It means that if you're acting under a color of state law, you can be a private party, you can be a nonprofit, you can be a religious institution even. But if you're "quote unquote" acting under color of state law, then you can be sued under this statute. What does it mean to act under color of state law? This does not actually affect. This is a fairly narrow set of people, set of institutions, set of circumstances where the religious institution is performing some function that the government would normally undertake. So, for example, it has been faith-based halfway houses have been found to be acting under a color of state law and able to be sued under various statutes. So a faith-based institution or a faith-based drug rehabilitation center where someone is sent there by court order, and so on, those have been found to be acting under color of state law, meaning that they are actually indistinguishable from the government. Now, the government is not allowed to discriminate on the basis of religion. The government cannot say, "Oh, you're Protestant, you can't work here. You're Jewish, you can," or vice versa, or whatever. Okay, the government can't do that. Religious institutions can do that. Religious institutions are permitted to say, we have under the First Amendment the right to say, we're not going to hire you because you're not Muslim. We're not going to hire you because you have beliefs that are different. You claim to be Muslim, but you have beliefs that are different than our beliefs that we consider proper. We're not going to hire you because you claim to be in a same-sex marriage, and so on and so on. So,
but once you start taking federal funding,
yes. So here's the gray area.
Yeah.
What's so tricky about this is that there is no clear law. There's no clear Supreme Court case that says when someone is and when someone is not a state actor, a government actor. It all kind of depends. It depends where you might be, what jurisdiction you're in, what the precedents of that particular court are that you're in, what are the particular facts of your case and your situation. So, for example, like an adoption agency, if you're a faith-based adoption agency, that's something that's, or if you're a food pantry, taking government money is a big part of it. So this adds, now, just to be very clear, there are actually many other statutes that you can be sued. I'll give you an example. That recently, in a case that we filed a friend of the court brief in, there was a school that in North Carolina, non-religious school, okay, but it's a charter school, and they had a separate dress code for boys and for girls. Girls had to wear skirts, long skirts. Boys had basically a Catholic school type, uniform. Boys have to wear pants. Well, some parent sued of a girl sued and said, oh, well, my daughter wants to wear pants, and this is discrimination on the basis of sex under Title IX. It's a law prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sex and with federal funding. Right. And so, but only the government or state actors are subject to this. So the court found that this was a state actor because it was receiving funds and also was part of the public school program. You know what I mean? It's a charter school, so it's like, right, serving a function, a government function. So therefore, so this school, even though it was not religious, if this school had been right now, there's actually a very big movement after a couple different very important Supreme Court cases to start looking at whether religious charter schools are a good idea. So right now, if not all, charter schools are secular. But if the government, because in the past there's been this understanding that, well, it violates the Establishment Clause, for the government to give money to religious institutions. But a recent Supreme Court case, Carson versus Macon, said actually it violates the Constitution, the provision against the Equal Protection Clause. Basically, it's discrimination. If you're going to give money to secular schools and institutions and so on, then you can't deny giving money just because a school is religious. And so this opens the door to religious charter schools. So a religious charter school would have to really really think very long and hard if they wanted to become part, accept government funding. Now, what does that have to do with this bill? Again, there are actually other statutes that someone could be sued under, and that would have to be worked out. Well, it's like, all right, maybe I am a state actor, but if I'm a state actor, I'm also a religious institution, so am I not protected by the First Amendment and so on? So it's like that would have to be worked out. But definitely what this law does is it creates, when you sue someone, you don't just sue them under one thing. You look and see, all right, their behavior arguably violated the law in 3, 4, 5 different ways. And the more credible legal theories you have on how they violated the law, the stronger your lawsuit is, because it might, 1 or 2 or 3 of those counts might get thrown out. But if your other one sticks, then you've still got something against them, right? You don't want to just put all your eggs in one legal theory or in one in law that you're suing someone under when you're bothering to go through all that to go to court. So if I am a same-sex, well, and anyway, let's not do that. If this guy over here is in a same-sex marriage and is fired from his job at the charter school or whatever, at the religious charter school, because he's in a same-sex marriage, he's going to go and he's going to sue under let's say under the section 1983, which is the law, it was anyway, a law giving jurisdiction to sue state actors under the Constitution. He's going to sue under Title IX. He's going to sue under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And now he's also going to sue under this statute, right? So even though you could have been sued anyway under a bunch of different things, here's a new thing that you're going to have to deal with, all right, I concede and I admit that this is actually probably not going to apply to too many people. And if you're being sued for this under different things, you've already got a headache going on. This is just like adds another layer of your headaches, But nevertheless, that's the situation. All right. So yeah. So
no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You want to finish?
So the bottom line here is that this law does not. This law makes an exemption for Islamic institutions, so they don't have to solemnize any marriages or any same-sex marriages or anything like that. It leaves a potential. It creates a potential new cause of action in case you are getting government grants and so on. It just adds another thing to your, to whether or not you really want to actually do and get yourself involved in any of those things. Unfortunately, and I hate to say it, I'm not trying to scaremonger here. There's a lot of scaremongering of, this is good. We're trying to be realistic here, So, it's not super likely that this would be used against you in that situation, but it is possible, And so that's really, those are really the main things that I would say about this. And then we can, so in other words, not a whole heck of a lot of immediate legal impact, not immediate, but we can talk about a couple of things. One, the metaphysical dimensions, but also the social dimensions of some other aspects of this law, how that.
So you definitely, I want to move towards that, but I guess I say, like, in summary, what it sounds like is that this particular act is not really a threat to a pure religious institution, right? Which is not receiving any type of government grants money or financing in any other particular form. But for those institutions who actually may be receiving some type of federal funding for their operations, then this is potentially a danger for them. Right? Is that accurate to say, you think?
Yes, that's definitely. I would say that's accurate. I would say that also I would caution that people are pretty creative and courts have gone sideways in a lot of ways. It's possible that there may be aspects of this law that will create new liability and so on. But I have read many analyses of this from religious liberty advocates, Christians and others. And I have read many of them, and I don't see any, apart from we have to distinguish between like the public sort of alarm at this, which really in reality does not stem from the actual potential practical immediate ramifications, but more is related to, number one, a general opposition to same-sex marriage, but also an opposition to what is it going to mean to be sort of, you become a weirdo now that your views are like the opposite of what the federal policy is. Those long-term issues are really more what's
exactly. And I think that's probably the more important discussion for us to have, considering what appears to be a benign legislation, with respect to what may happen on the ground, but I do think the more, potentially deleterious aspects of that have to do with starting with, again, just the definition of marriage, right? This is we're in a culture, in society, in a world which puts a lot of emphasis in positive, thinking, positivist thinking, the positivism, the words, if it's legal, it's moral, right? And so now having to deal with that and say, okay, well, it's the law. And often, the thing that's interesting is that Muslims like quite often to say things like, we have the obligation to respect the law of the land, right? So if something's like legal, then we have to respect it, and of course, but we're very, selective when it comes to this issue. But usually this will come up with polygyny. So I don't think that there's going to be any Muslims who are actually going to be outraged by polygyny. And there's one brother, Farouk Thomas, had asked the question about whether or not this legislation or this would it legalize polygyny, and we already answered it. No, actually, it outlaws polygyny, right? So
yeah, it specifically outlaws it.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. It's an actual independent clause about polygyny,
Yeah.
right? This make it clear. There's no ambiguity about it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
there is a little ambiguity. I will say.
Yeah. I've seen your post. I know what you're going to say. But go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. See, this you saw that, right? So, what the law actually says is in Section 7B, it says no federal recognition of polygamous marriages, and then it says nothing in this act or any amendment made by this act shall be construed to require or authorize federal recognition of marriages between more than two individuals. But of course, polygamy or polygyny is Islamic marriage is not between more than two individuals. Like if I have 4 wives, it's not 5 people who are married. There's just 4 marriages. You know what I mean? There's me and my first wife. There's me and my second wife. But my first, second, third, and fourth wives are not married. They have no contractual or any other type of. They might be co-wives in a sort of social sense, but they're not going to be married in any way. So one marriage does not participate in another marriage. And actually, I have seen Christian conservatives objecting to this law on this basis. They say, "Oh, well, that's a loophole right there." I don't know. Maybe it is, but I will say that we, if this statute here said, "Oh, and polygamous marriages will be recognized," well, that doesn't really. That's not a very good. We shouldn't be happy about that. On the one hand, of course, we should be happy if the law does not, if the law allows something that we are allowed. That's a good thing in the abstract. But if the basis for that, if like the philosophical basis of that is marriage is not is really has no actual essence to it, you know what I'm saying? And so that therefore, think of the hadith which talks about all the different marriage forms of marriage that the Quraysh recognized, the Mushrikeen recognized in Mecca prior to Islam. They recognize. I can't enumerate them, but maybe you can. Like the marriages where a prostitute will have like 5 men or whatever, numerous men, and then she gets pregnant, and then they figure out who that one. That's like a marriage.
Yeah, she has a baby, and she goes and chooses to say, "Well, you're the one, you're the father," and they would
exactly. So we know that the society of the Mushrikeen prior to Islam recognized different forms of marriage. So if there were a bill to come along, let's say we recognize all of these different forms of things as marriage, including between people of the same sex, for that matter, between a man and his sister, or a man and his daughter, we recognize, or a man and his son, and we recognize same-sex marriages, and we recognize also a man marrying more than one wife. Right. Are we going to be happy about that? And they're going to say, and that's because marriage has no actual definition to it at all, and no real meaning. It's just whatever people say it is, whatever culture.
So you're not saying that polygyny is a bad thing, or the legalization of polygyny would be a bad thing necessarily, but it just since it would be legitimized under the guise of this sort of empty. I guess empty moral vessel of like relationships, which have been all sort of deemed to be sacred under the government. That's what makes it a problem, because you're just one among many different forms of marriage, right, which are to be legal and therefore moral, right? But I think I would agree with that as well.
Yeah. First of all, marrying more than one wife is something that it's not obligatory on us. It's permissible. According to most scholars, so it's something that's permissible. So if we say that, tomorrow Congress is going to abolish all laws on the basis that all law is just every single conceivable law is an unjust imposition of restrictions on human freedom. And tomorrow you can rob, you can cheat, you can steal. but you can also have more than one wife. And we say, hey, we can have more than one wife. I mean, no, we need to object to the fact that now society is declaring that there should be no laws and no morality whatsoever.
Yeah.
You see, so that's an extreme.
Right. Yeah. The philosophical basis is really void of any value. Right.
Exactly. And so that is so here. If you look at there's another interesting. First of all, we know, and it is an absolute fact that that relativism is false. It is not true that same-sex marriage is okay in Belgium, but it is not okay in Texas. I mean, and when we say okay, we mean in the sense that there is no absolute any sense of what is good and bad. There's merely what those people decide they want to do. You know what I mean? They want to have same-sex marriage in Belgium, great. They don't want to have same-sex marriage in Texas, that's just fine. We know that that's wrong. We know that marriage has an actual essence to it. And our ulama talked about that, and I actually wrote an article about that, which hopefully we can put, inshallah, in the description. So what is the essence? So for example, Imam al-Ghazali talked about marriage in terms of, many of them talk about marriage in terms of what are its aims, what are its maqasid. You know, so if the marriage is achieving those maqasid, number one being procreation, if it is if the definition of marriage has to include those aims, which, by the way, this is but not all marriages. This is the typical argument against a definition of marriage by the aim of procreation. Well, not all marriages end in procreation. That's true. However, those are exceptions that do not alter the essence of the purpose of marriage. I mean, the purpose of marriage is in order to replicate, in order to renew the species, you know, the human species. That's and it's to do so in a way that eliminates sin and creates responsibilities and so on. You know, so therefore, this is one of the reasons why sodomy is wrong. It's wrong in the abstract. It's not right because the law says it says it is, and wrong when the law says it's wrong in the abstract, because it is a means of sex. It separates sex from procreation, and it is a means of self-glorification and self gratification that takes procreation, by definition, takes it out of
right. It's not a pathway. Yeah, it's not a pathway leading to the
destruction of the species.
Right. Exactly. Right.
So these are all things that, like, the human being can know even without revelation, and let alone when revelation comes. In Christianity and Islam, Judaism, we all see in our scriptures, the traces of this, but we can actually, understand it. But so what's happening here is that the law is, so this law, right, this Respect for Marriage Act, it begins with some, and this is kind of derived from Obergefell did the same thing. It's beginning with the very title of it, Respect for Marriage. You're not respecting marriage because you are denying the essence of marriage. You're denying the purpose. Not, by the way, not to say that procreation, again, there are other secondary purposes, love and
unitive, right? It's also unitive, right?
Exactly, right. We know that, but to define it in such a way that eliminates its essence is to destroy marriage. So it's not to respect marriage; it's to destroy marriage. Okay, and I say this obviously with the most respect for the humanity of individuals who believe that they think they're in a same-sex marriage. It's just the reality is you're not, and may God guide you, and I want the best for you, but you're not in a marriage, it's not a marriage,
Yeah, and that's what part of those problems we were talking about metaphysically is that, first and foremost, again, the definition. Your marriage has its definition. You can't change the definition to make something real, which is not real. Or this whole, and then going further than that, everything that we see we're going through with regard to the whole gender confusion, and pronouns, and all these other things. They're trying to rewire the human brain. They're trying to alter the human nature. right? And I think that this is the much more harmful aspect of the passage of this type of legislation, because we get used to it. We say, "Oh, it's just normal. This is the way that things are here," right? But and we laugh at gay people and transgender people on TV, and all these things that have been normalized through the movies and Hollywood and all this. They have an effect on especially the younger generations as they're going through the current educational system, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, it's an attack on reality itself.
Yeah.
And so when I mean, if a law is passed that says that you can change your gender, I mean, you can pass a law that said squares are now round, and it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't alter the reality. You can pass a law that says the Earth is now flat, but it doesn't alter the reality. I mean, in fact, such a law is actually more plausible than a law saying that a law that is passed that says that men can be women, or that two women can marry, because those are things that are actually deny reality in the metaphysical sense. Right. Because the Earth could conceivably be flattened by an asteroid or something like that, and so like one can think of an Earth being flat, but you cannot actually think of a same-sex marriage. And you cannot actually think of a man becoming a woman. It's not because this is how it's created. It's in the definition of the thing, just like you can't think of a round square. Right. So what the law is doing is, now here's a very important point. Okay, another thing that this law does, and this is going to bear on two aspects of what we're talking about. If you look in the preamble, it says. Millions of people, including interracial and same-sex couples, have entered into marriage and have enjoyed the rights including interracial and same-sex couples? Mm-hmm. Why are you mentioning interracial and same-sex couples in the same place? And likewise, in another section of this bill, it says, no person acting under color of state law may deny full faith and credit to any public act, blah, 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 pertaining to a marriage between two individuals on the basis of the same sex, race, ethnicity. Wait a minute. Why are they bringing in race, ethnicity, and sex into the same sentence, into the same concept? Well, for two reasons. One, because the Supreme Court case Loving versus Virginia, the Supreme Court decided in I forget what year it was, but it was many years ago, it was 70s or something, maybe 80s anyway. They said that it is unconstitutional for a state to have a law prohibiting marriage between different races. Mm-hmm. So because this...
All is well?
I don't know what's happening, to be honest, what's going on here. So because the
it's about Loving versus Virginia.
Yeah, because the Supreme Court grounded its decision in substantive due process, and because Thomas cast a doubt on the notion of substantive due process as a concept, one of the ways of drumming up panic that to motivate the passage of this bill was to say that, the conservatives, not only is Loving versus Virginia on its way out because it's based on a legal theory that Thomas doubts, but also because those who are against same-sex marriage are also racists.
Right.
You know what I mean? In other words, no one would be against same-sex marriage except someone who is also a racist.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm. So what's happening here is two things. Number one, the law, it's saying, people can believe that marriage is between two opposite sex only based on honorable reasons. At the same time, they're saying that if you deny same-sex marriage, you're also, of the same category of person that also is against interracial marriage. Now, just in the same way that we said that a marriage, this is important to note, and this was said actually by Blackstone, who was a legal theorist, who was very influential on the founders. He was writing about natural law. So he said something very true, which I think Muslims would absolutely agree with. In fact, Ibn Rushd said something very similar. He said that a law, a human man-made positive law that accords with God's law or natural law, either a revealed law like in the Ten Commandments, or natural law, meaning a law that we can understand to be what God wants of us through our reason, that a human law, that man-made law that is in harmony with God's law, is actually not really doing anything, because it's already law. You know what I mean? In other words, like it doesn't, the action of the human being, now the human being might add more to like increase the punishment or something like that, you know what I mean, that has been laid down. But a law, for example, that's prohibiting murder, even if the human being had never, like a legislature or a ruler had not declared that to be the law, it would still be the law. I mean, there's not, they're not really doing anything. Now, but he said that, like, for example, a law that prohibits exporting more than 50 tons of wheat a year or something like that, that's actually doing something, because that's in the realm which God leaves to the human being to, and that's the area in which positive law can actually like function, but law that harmonizes with the natural law or with God's law is only declaratory, meaning it is only stating what already is. It's not creating something new. This is actually a critical distinction which has been lost in our secular era. Now, look at this. Let's look now back at this the Respect for Marriage Act. Number one, it is not within the human power to declare to be invalid marriages between people of different quote unquote races. To what extent race even has any, has meaning. I mean, it has some meaning, but whether it, whatever real meaning, whatever, you know what I mean? It's just like a human being, a law that is contrary to God's law is not a valid law. That's also what Blackstone said. So by prohibiting laws that prohibit same-sex marriage, that prohibit interracial marriage, this statute is actually not doing anything, because already any law that would purport to prohibit a marriage between two people of different races is actually an invalid law. This law has to be, if you obey this law, you are disobeying God, really. Not that we have in the Sharia some revealed thing that says all laws, all marriage shall be recognized between people. It's just that when you are trying, if as a ruler or a man, whether we're talking about whether this is an Islamic society or whether it's in I don't know, Burkina Faso, or it's in Fiji or something like that, someone who tries to pass a law that a man who tries to pass a law that says that marriage is illegal, invalid between people of different races, this law itself is invalid, and to obey it is in fact to disobey God. So in that sense, that law, this statute is not doing anything. And on the other hand, in order to the extent that the statute claims that it is recognizing marriage between two men, it is also not doing anything. It's false. You see what I'm saying? Right. Now, to the extent that it recognizes marriages between a man and a woman, it's also not doing anything, because it's just declaring what is already what God already allows. You see, so this law is actually not doing anything of substance, unless one believes in positive law. Unless one believes, as you said, that when the law declares something, when the law puts something into effect, then that is now reality. That is what is good. That is what is moral and what is true. And we absolutely reject that, because we're believers in the metaphysical. We're believers in the higher law.
Right. Yeah, mashallah, that was great. I wanted to give the viewers the opportunity to ask some questions. There are some questions here. I wanted to first start with I see a lot of people saying assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And I went to correction, brother. It was Brother Levon Brown earlier who asked a question about polygyny. There's one brother here, Farouk Thomas, who says, I believe he's commenting on something you said earlier in the conversation. He says that they see the Constitution as a living document, but simultaneously saying it's subjective. Is this a correct understanding of them? Yeah. So
Yeah, this is actually a really good good point. You know, we should not be obviously we definitely should not be surprised when we find like incoherence and inconsistency in modern ideologies and so on. So the idea of the Constitution as a living document is an interesting one, and I talked about this. I've got an essay that I wrote on this in the magazine called The American Conservative, and also talked about it with a podcast I did with Michael Abraham when Dobbs was first released. But the idea of the Constitution as a living document is actually one that is somewhat derived from our real understanding of law. That is to say that any kind of human law is only can only really be understood as what we might call like an instantiation of God's law. That is, that it's a specification of some of a higher law. Okay, so to the extent that it is harmonious with it. So, for example, the idea of, okay, we're going to pass a law that people have to wear helmets while riding a motorcycle. So this law is actually coherent with, or in line with a broader, I don't know, don't kill yourself type of principle. Now whether it's wise, whether it is something that the government should bother itself with, and so on. So those are all different questions. But it's not on its face just like invalid. Where, for example, another law that says that I don't know. Anyway, I mean, that you take my point that. So the idea of the Constitution as a living document is to say that is to acknowledge that there is a higher law, but it's to say that this higher law is always changing. This higher law of what constitutes rights, what constitutes freedom, and so on, is ever expanding, because the human being is ever moving closer and closer and closer to a utopian state of liberation in this life. And so that's why things that were seen as proper and in fact quite liberal understandings of the Constitution many years ago are now seen as actually regressive, the opposite of progressive, because it's just simply coming at an earlier temporal stage of the progress of humanity towards ultimate liberation. So in that sense, but now where we disagree with that, we agree that there's a higher law. It's just that we believe that the human nature is really permanent. God created us in a certain way, and that's why the Quran is valid for the time that it was revealed, and it's valid for the time now. How we apply it and how it's to be applied to differing circumstances is a different thing. But the nature of the human being and what is due to the human being and so on in itself, those principles don't change because human nature doesn't change. So this is they're right in a sense and they're wrong in a sense. So now when we talk about the Constitution being subjective, his point here is interesting, because there are also people who say, well, subjective in the sense that it's not universal. In reality, these are actually two different ideologies. The first one is more like sort of progressivism, and the idea that the Constitution is subjective is actually relativism. It's the idea that we have this Constitution, but it's only it was right for its time, or it's right for us, but it's not necessarily right. I mean, that's true in the sense that the Constitution is a specific. It was never intended to be anything more than a specific set of how this particular group of human beings are going to arrange their affairs. And yet, it was certainly not intended that it was embodying certain universal principles. Well, the idea of relativism is there is no such thing as universal principles at all. You know what I mean? Like, and this is found in like things like critical race theory, and on the other hand, national conservatism and other sort of postmodernism on the right and left believes that the Constitution is subjective, relative, and so on. So it's actually a very interesting conversation. It probably deserves a lot more than what I gave it, but hope I addressed it in some way.
No, alhamdulillah. I think that was. I'm not sure. Of course, the questioner could clarify if there's anything else they wanted to.
Sure. Yeah.
But fundamentally, that was, I would say, probably the most substantive questions I've seen. I mean, there's some comments that have been listed, and I think that in line with that, this whole idea of the living constitution, as opposed to it being, and at the same time, seeing it as a subjective text is really interesting to see that when we consider the advancements or the progress of the so-called LGBTQ plus people. Personally, I don't like the idea of identifying that as a community, but which I think is also one of those other problems that we have in today. We accept a new definition of marriage, and we accept that these letters represent an actual community of people when actually they are. There's a lot of extreme diversity there. Some people don't even want to be identified with the alphabet itself. But I mean, there was one brother who mentioned that the importance of us having our own definitions. But what I was originally going to say is that what I find to be very intriguing is that and fascinating at the same time is that so many countries in the world, so many cultures in the world actually are resisting the push to embrace this decadent type of culture which has been promoted, right, in our own country and in Europe and elsewhere. So for instance, of course, African countries have a certain attitude towards this and say these are not concerns for us. We see what happened recently in Qatar, which really Qatar really made me proud, right, to see a Muslim country finally sort of stand up for itself and say, you know what, we have a different morality or a different culture, and we just want you to respect our way of being, just as we try to respect your way of being. Those things are not concerned for us. Of course, you see the pushback from Russia, from China, and then even like Indonesia. There was some recent legislation happening in Indonesia, which really amazing stuff. I mean, some of the things were extreme. Some, you're outlawing speaking against the president, things like that. You can go to prison, but there seems to be a reaction, an international reaction to the attempts to promote all of these efforts, which, seem to one unified conclusion, which is that a reduction in the human population, right? Because abortion reduces population, men being with men, women being women reduces population. And of course, there are other ways that it's happening. Again, we don't really have to get into sort of conspiracy theory at this point, but fundamentally, I think that part is a fact, that these efforts, as a matter of fact, there's an article I posted earlier today, an opinion piece from a professor at Johns Hopkins, who actually was titled something like, babies are bad for the environment, right?
Right.
Right.
So there's been a lot of that, actually, a lot of that going around. A lot of studies suggesting that babies are bad for the environment, and that the less babies you have, the better of a citizen of the world you are, right, and so on. Right. And of course, they really focus on. Actually, Langston Hughes wrote a short story about that, saying that it's funny how basically it's a dialogue. It's kind of like a Socratic dialogue between two, like a white guy and a black guy, and he's saying you. How come? Why are you always focusing on Africa for your population reduction? So look at like organizations like Marie Stopes International, Planned Parenthood International, which really heavily promote anti-birth policies in like China. They'll make adoption available, adoption services abortion services available in China when they know that China has a one-child policy. Latin America, Africa, they just assume that it's just like an understood thing that the less of these people there are, the better for for them and for everyone. It's like it's a very disgusting and very dangerous ideology. It's an anti-human ideology for sure. But on the other hand, I mean, like one has to be very careful because. So look, for example, at Hungary. Hungary has these, supposedly like pro-family policies, and all that's good and well. But we've entered an era where the truth and religion actually have become quite alien to people. So I just had like a bizarre, like hour-long debate with a Hungarian lawyer, a woman from Hungary who was at an event I won't mention, and she was promoting Hungary as a as a tolerant blah 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 place. And I said, your constitution says we support Christianity because we recognize it's the way that it preserved Hungarian, I don't know, whatever, civilization or something. And I said, that's wrong. I mean, you should say we support Christianity because it's true. You should say Christianity is true in your constitution. She's like, what? No. She was thinking that she's a conservative because their constitution says we appreciate Christianity's contributions to preserving Hungarian culture, which of course is actually a deeply secular and in fact a relativist way of being. And yet you're promoting families. You're promoting families. What you're doing is you're promoting the Hungarian nation. You're promoting essentially a very secular idea of the human being. What we have to be careful, because a lot of these folks will actually, there are a lot of people who come up who arrive at true positions, but from false premises. Yeah. So we have to be very careful in engaging who is on the same side as us and who is agreeing with us, to what extent they are agreeing with us, but getting there from false premises, so that really it's irrelevant if their conclusion is right, if their starting point is wrong. Now, obviously, someone who's a Christian, I'm a Muslim, Allah does not accept, any, religion other than Islam. But at the same time, there's degrees of severity of disbelief, So someone who's saying we need to have more children because we need to increase the white population, or for that matter, the black population, or the Hungarian population. We do need to increase the population. There's no doubt about that. Allah wants there to be human beings on the earth, but He wants there to be human beings on the earth so that we can be guided.
Yeah, right. Believers. He wants believers, more believers. The more believers, the better, right?
Right. Not idolaters, not worshipers of our race or of our state or something like that. So I'm really quite. It's actually it would be more obvious. The falsehood of the Hungarian, for example, I'm not picking on Hungary, but I mean, just for example, they're held up as a somehow by many, even Christian believers, conservatives, because they're fooled, So it was just because they have a good policy on, for example, they're not recognizing same-sex marriage or something like that, is actually it's actually quite dangerous, because it can fool those who are believers into thinking that these people are on the same side when they're really not,
Yeah, right. So. Right. Well, I appreciate all that. Inshallah, I think that we've been speaking for long enough. I mean,
yes.
I know your babies. They want you.
Okay.
If you have any closing comments, you can make those, and then we can close out, inshallah.
No, I think I would just say that a final note of caution, warning, and so on about the potential effect of this is indeed that the fact that as each day progresses, the culture more and more tends to see those who believe in the divinely ordered life and traditional understandings of marriage and the human being and so on, increasingly sees us as, inshallah, it's us, sees us as bigots, as relics at best and bigots at worst. You can put that into, you can say, Bergefell oh, well, people who have such beliefs or do so for honorable reasons, or people who, who, or you can put that in your Respect for Marriage Act and so on. But as the law increasingly, I mean, that's increasingly being seen as the federal policy. The federal policy is that, quote unquote, discriminating against same-sex marriages is the same thing as discriminating against interracial marriages.
Yeah.
And, look, the culture is what drives law, and to a large extent, you know what I mean? I mean, law can lead culture, but culture often drives law. There's a feedback loop, So as, the culture continues to drift in this, very dangerous direction, then, our situation is going to be increasingly precarious. I don't mean to say that as kind of like a, oh, we're victims, and that's not what I mean. I just mean to say that this is a reality, and likewise, it is a responsibility on us to really do da'wah and call other people to the truth and to Islam, and if not Islam, then at least that they will understand the truth and beauty and that which Islam overlaps with Christianity and traditional Christianity, traditional Judaism, and we have to do so in a way that is wise and is kind and respectful of the dignity of everyone, because this is not the time to be owning the libs or whatever, or scoring points and being harsh. We have to recognize that kindness really is the best way of handling this situation. Yeah, we're still going to be called bigots, you know what I'm saying? But at least we're going to be respectful of people's, giving them the rights that are due to them of smiles and kindness, and that also is the best way to win people over.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, barakallah. We appreciate that. Now, everyone else here, please stay with us. We're going to let Brother Ismail go. Inshallah, we appreciate your time and your knowledge. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and bless your family. Inshallah, looking forward to more of this, But inshallah, so you can head on out. In the meantime, we're going to bring on Brother Khalil Muhsin. Inshallah, give him an opportunity to speak to you. Please stay with us for a few minutes, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, especially as we move into this new year, inshallah. Barakallah. Khalil,
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. My name is Khalil Muqsin. I'm the general manager of the Lamppost Education Initiative. And at this time, we'd really like to thank Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali and our brother Ismail Royer for that excellent presentation on the Respect for Marriage Act. That presentation is part of what we're trying to do at Lamppost. One of the things that we're trying to do is to address very difficult social, economic, political issues that impact the reality of Muslims throughout the West, throughout the Western world, particularly English-speaking Muslims. So it is part of our objective at the Lamppost Education Initiative to form ourselves, as Brother Ismail was just stating, as people of uncompromising character, uncompromising belief, and despite being called bigots and other things, we are dedicated to the truth of Islam. We are dedicated and committed to the truth of Islam. And in order for us to present these views, which are not always popular, again, we're viewed as, like Brother Ismail said, as bigots, and we're unpopular now. In order for us to continue this process of presenting Islam, presenting our position on these issues, we need your support. The Lamppost Education Initiative needs your support in order to continue our work. It is part of our objectives to continue and do more of these webinars that we just presented now. We have books that we have published. Our most recent publication is this book here, There is No Male Preference in Islamic Law. And this book itself is a bit controversial, but it has a lot of much needed information that we need has Muslims of, again, uncompromising values, uncompromising principles to the truth of Islam. So in order for us to continue our efforts at the Lamppost Education Initiative, we are having an end of the month fundraising campaign. We'd like you to go to the website that's being presented below and support our efforts. You can support our efforts by donating, and donate generously. Help us so that we can continue to do this work. And we also ask that you also buy the products that we have. We have a number of books, articles. Please go to our website, take a look at some of those things. The most recent work that we have, there is no preference, there is no male preference in Islamic law. You can find it at this website address here. Find it. Please take the time, purchase the book, read the book, and stay tuned to the Lamppost Education Initiative, because we have a lot more coming, inshallah, with your support. Jazakallah bi khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Inshallah. Barakallah fiqh. Thank you all once again. Appreciate everyone being with us today. Inshallah, hopefully we have more opportunities to do this very soon and into the next year, inshallah. Looking forward to seeing everyone, and please do support us. Barakallahu feekum wa sallallahu sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim taslima kathira wa subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.